That Saturday evening, as the sun sank behind the low rooftops, Franklin decided to take a walk. His mom was on shift at the hospital. Emily was playing with a new friend across the street, and he was eager to explore the neighborhood. Franklin walked slowly, breathing in the scent of damp leaves crunching under his sneakers. He turned a corner where a small park began, a few benches, a playground, and a basketball court surrounded by a low fence. The court was empty, but two older boys, maybe 16 or 17, sat on a bench nearby. They were white, wearing denim jackets and backward baseball caps. One held a bottle of soda, the other chewed gum, smacking it loudly. Franklin noticed them right away, but paid no mind. He was about to pass by when he heard a voice, sharp, laced with mockery. "Hey you, where you headed?" What's about to happen in the next few minutes will shock you, but before we dive into the story, make sure to subscribe and give a like. Now let's jump in. "Hey you, where you headed?" Franklin stopped. His heart raced, but he didn't show it. He slowly turned, removed one earbud, and looked at the boys. The one with the soda bottle tall, with sandy hair and a smug grin, stood up from the bench. The other, stockier, stayed seated, but his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Just walking," Franklin said calmly, hands in his pockets. His voice was steady, though inside, everything tightened. "Just walking," the tall one mimicked, stepping closer. "You're one of those new kids, right? From the house on River Street." Franklin nodded, holding his gaze. He'd heard that tone before, in Chicago, at school, on the street. A tone that promised trouble. "What? Your old neighborhood didn't have parks. Why'd you come here?" The tall one smirked, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "I live here," Franklin said simply. "This is my neighborhood." The stocky boy laughed like he'd heard a great joke. "Your neighborhood? That's rich." He slapped his knee. "Hear that, Zach? He thinks this is his neighborhood." Zach, the tall one, leaned closer to Franklin. He smelled of mint gum and cheap cologne. "Listen, kid," he said, lowering his voice. "You might live here, but that doesn't mean you're welcome." "Got it." Franklin felt a hot wave of anger rise in his chest. He could have snapped back, thrown something sharp, or just walked away. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked Zach straight in the eyes. "Why aren't I welcome?" he asked quietly but firmly. "Did I do something?" Zach clearly wasn't expecting that. He faltered, glancing at his friend for backup. The stocky one, apparently named Kyle, shrugged. "It's just, you know how it is," Zach muttered, his confidence slipping. "People around here don't like changes." "Changes," Franklin repeated, not breaking eye contact. "Or people who don't look like you." Silence hung between them, heavy as autumn fog. Kyle stopped chewing his gum. Zach's face reddened, his jaw clenched. Franklin could see the mix of anger and embarrassment in him. But he didn't back down. He stood there, hands in pockets, back straight, as if the whole world was watching. "What? You a smartass," Zach finally spat, but his voice wasn't as threatening anymore. "Just asking," Franklin replied. "If I'm bothering you, tell me why. Maybe we can sort it out." Kyle suddenly stood up, spitting his gum onto the pavement. "Listen, kid, don't get cocky," he growled, stepping toward Franklin. "Or else." But he didn't finish. From behind the trees surrounding the park came a sound, crunching branches and quick footsteps. All three turned. A figure emerged from the shadows, an older woman, about 60, in a warm plaid jacket, with a small dog on a leash. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, and her eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice leaving no room for nonsense. Her dog, a fluffy terrier, growled at Zach and Kyle. Zach stepped back, raising his hands. "Nothing, Mrs. Evans," he mumbled. "Just talking." "Talking," she repeated, shifting her gaze to Franklin. "Then why does this boy look like you've backed him into a corner?" Franklin stayed silent, his heart still pounding. He didn't know if this Mrs. Evans was on his side or if things were about to get worse. But something in her tone, firm yet fair, gave him hope. "I'm fine," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Just getting to know each other." Mrs. Evans narrowed her eyes, sizing up Zach and Kyle. Her dog growled again. "Getting to know each other, huh?" She turned to the older boys. "You two better head home, and if I catch you bothering anyone here again, I'll have a word with your parents. And the sheriff, too." Zach and Kyle exchanged glances. Kyle muttered something under his breath, but Zach just nodded. All right, we're going," he said, pulling Kyle by the sleeve. They walked off, throwing Franklin one last glare. When they disappeared around the corner, Mrs. Evans turned to him. "You really okay, son?" she asked, her tone softer. Franklin nodded, though his hands still trembled in his pockets. "Yeah, thanks," he said. "I just didn't want trouble." "You didn't start any trouble," she said sharply. "I know those two. They think they own the place. But you held your ground well. Not everyone would have stayed so calm." Franklin shrugged, unsure what to say. He felt relief, but also a heavy weight. It was only his first evening out, and he'd already faced what he'd feared moving here. "What's your name?" Mrs. Evans asked, adjusting the leash. "Franklin," he replied. "I'm Linda Evans. Live 2 blocks that way." She nodded toward the park. "If those two give you grief again, come find me. I'll set them straight." Franklin gave a small, genuine smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Evans." She nodded, patted her dog, and went on her way. Franklin stood there a moment, listening to the wind rustle the treetops. The smell of leaves mingled with a faint trace of her perfume, something old-fashioned, with a hint of lavender. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but as he turned to head home, he heard a faint sound behind him, like a twig snapping. He glanced back, but saw nothing, just the darkness of the park and the flicker of streetlights. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. Home, sitting on the couch, with the TV off, Franklin replayed the evening in his mind. He could tell his mom, but he didn't want to worry her. She was already exhausted from work. He could avoid the park, but that would mean backing down. And Franklin wasn't one to back down. The next day at school, he spotted Zach and Kyle in the hallway. They were by the lockers, laughing with a group. But when Zach met his eyes, his smile faded. Franklin didn't look away. He knew this wasn't over. The next week in Willow Grove dragged on slowly, like syrup dripping from a spoon. The autumn air grew colder, the evenings darker. Franklin tried to steer clear of the park, but the feeling of being watched never left him. At school, he noticed Zach and Kyle in the hallways, their glances, sometimes mocking, sometimes cold, boring into his back. They didn't approach or speak, but their presence was like a shadow cast over his every day. Willow Grove High was large, with wide corridors and shiny lockers, but Franklin felt like an outsider. In Chicago, he'd had friends and knew how to navigate a crowd, but here, everything was different. Students looked at him with curiosity or wariness, and the teachers, though they smiled, seemed distant. His only solace was history class, Mr. Rogers, an old teacher with a gray mustache, had a way of storytelling that held the class spellbound. Franklin loved hearing about the civil rights movement, about people who fought for justice without giving up. It reminded him he wasn't alone. But on Friday, Everything changed. That day, Franklin stayed late after school, helping Mr. Rogers sort books in his classroom. The sun was setting when he left, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. The street was nearly empty, with only a few students lingering by the parking lot, laughing and kicking a ball around. Franklin headed home, taking a shortcut through a small grove near the school. It was a shorter path, though darker. The trees hummed with the wind, and leaves rustled underfoot. He didn't notice them at first, but when he heard a branch snap behind him, his body tensed like a taut string. Franklin turned and saw Zach. He stood in the middle of the path, hands in the pockets of his denim jacket, with that same smug grin. But this time, he wasn't with Kyle. Beside him was another guy older, about 18, with close-cropped blonde hair and a barbed wire tattoo on his neck. His name was Trevor, and Franklin had heard of him, a senior even the teachers feared. Rumor had it he'd been expelled from another school for fighting, but his father, a local businessman, had fixed it. Well, newbie, Zach drawled, stepping closer. Out for another stroll. Franklin stopped, sizing up the situation. 2 against 1, a narrow path, no one around. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. I'm going home, he said curtly, locking eyes with Zach. Leave me alone. Trevor let out a hoarse laugh, like a cough. Hear that, Zach? He's giving us orders, he said, spitting on the ground. Kid thinks he's in charge here. Franklin felt anger simmering inside, but kept it in check. He remembered his mom's words. Don't let them get to you. You're stronger than their words. But Trevor, unlike Zach, wasn't here for just taunts. Listen, Trevor said, stepping closer, his eyes glinting with malice. You think you can just show up here and act like you own the place? This is our town, got it? And people like you don't belong. Franklin's fists clenched in his pockets. People like you. The words cut like a knife. He'd heard them before, in Chicago, from random passersby, from guys on the subway. But here, in the quiet of the grove, they hit harder, heavier, more dangerous. I'm not bothering anyone, Franklin said, his voice trembling, but his gaze steady. What do you want from me? What do we want? Trevor leaned in so close Franklin could smell the tobacco on his breath. We want you to know your place, monkey. The word struck like a slap. Franklin felt everything explode inside, anger, shame, fear, all at once. His hands shot out of his pockets, fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. Zach, behind Trevor, smirked, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. What did you say? Franklin asked, his voice low but charged with such force that even Trevor hesitated for a moment. You heard me, Trevor replied, but his tone wavered. He glanced at Zach, as if seeking backup. Franklin took a step forward. He was shorter than Trevor, lanky, but his eyes burned with a fire Trevor hadn't expected. Say it again, Franklin said, his voice like steel. Trevor laughed, but it came out nervous. Oh, the kid wants trouble. He shoved Franklin in the chest, not hard, but enough to make him step back. Come on, show me what you've got. Franklin's mind blurred. He knew he should walk away, that fighting wasn't the answer. But the humiliation, those words, that look, it had all built up like a storm ready to break. And when Trevor shoved him again, harder this time, Franklin snapped. He lunged forward, his fist connecting with Trevor's jaw with a dull thud. Trevor staggered back, clutching his face, his eyes wide with shock. Zach shouted something incoherent, but Franklin wasn't listening. All he saw was Trevor, recovering and charging at him. They collided, tumbling to the ground. Leaves crunched beneath them, the smell of dirt and damp mixing with the metallic tang of adrenaline. Trevor was stronger, heavier, but Franklin fought like a cornered animal, biting and thrashing. He felt blows to his shoulder, his side, but the pain seemed distant, drowned out by rage. Zach tried to jump in, grabbing Franklin's hoodie, but Franklin twisted free, shoving him so hard Zach fell to his knees. "Stop!" a sharp, piercing voice cut through. The fight halted as quickly as it had started. Franklin, panting heavily, pulled away from Trevor, who was clutching a split lip. Zach stood off to the side, nursing his elbow. On the path stood a girl, about 15, with long dark hair tied in a ponytail and a backpack slung over one shoulder. Her name was Sophie. Franklin recognized her from math class. She was trembling, but her eyes blazed with determination. "Are you all insane?" she shouted, her gaze darting from Franklin to Trevor. "I'm calling the teachers." Trevor spat blood onto the ground, his face twisted with anger. "Get lost, Sophie," he snarled. "This isn't your business." "No, it is my business," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "I'll record everything, and you, Trevor, will finally get expelled." Trevor took a step toward her, but Franklin stepped between them, his chest heaving. "Don't touch her," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Trevor stopped, his eyes narrowing. But he saw something in Franklin's gaze, not fear, not weakness, but something that made him back off. "Let's go, Zach," he muttered, wiping blood from his chin. "This loser's not worth it." They walked off, Trevor throwing Franklin one last hateful glare. Sophie stood there, clutching her phone, her fingers shaking. Franklin lowered his eyes, feeling the adrenaline fade and pain pulsing through his body. His hoodie was torn, a scratch on his arm bleeding. "You okay?" Sophie asked quietly, pocketing her phone. Franklin nodded but didn't look at her. He felt shame, not for fighting, but for losing control. He'd promised himself to be better, to stay calm, but Trevor had crossed a line. "Thanks," he mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But you shouldn't have gotten involved. It could have been dangerous." "And you shouldn't have fought," she shot back, though her tone softened. "But I get it. Trevor. He gets under everyone's skin." Franklin sighed, picking up his backpack from the ground. His hands were still shaking. "I didn't want to," he said quietly. "But he said something I couldn't let slide." Sophie nodded, as if she understood. "Come on," she said. "You need to clean up, or your mom will think you joined a gang." Franklin gave a faint but genuine smile. They walked off together, though he knew this wasn't over. Trevor wasn't the type to forget, and Franklin had a sinking feeling the next time would be worse. At home, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he stared at the bruise under his eye and his torn hoodie. His mom wasn't back from work yet, and he was glad. He didn't want to explain. But as he lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside, his thoughts circled one question: how to stop this? Not with fists or shouts, but in a way that would make them understand. Make everyone understand. The next day at school, rumors of the fight spread like wildfire. Some looked at Franklin with respect, others with judgment. But when he saw Trevor in the hallway, Trevor didn't approach. He just stared, long and cold. And Franklin knew this was only the beginning, that a week had passed since the fight, but the air in Willow Grove remained heavy, like the calm before a storm. Franklin tried to slip back into routine. School, homework, evenings with Emily watching old comedies while their mom was on shift. But the bruise under his eye, though fading, was a constant reminder of what happened. And then there were the stairs. In the hallways, the cafeteria, even on the street. Some students whispered as he passed, others looked away. Franklin wasn't sure what was worse, the curiosity or the silence. Trevor and Zach kept their distance, but Franklin could feel their presence like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Kyle, their friend, shot him a few venomous glares but didn't act. Sophie, the girl who'd stopped the fight, now gave him a friendly nod in the hallway sometimes. Franklin was grateful, but hesitant to get close. He didn't want to drag her into his mess that on Saturday morning Franklin sat at the kitchen table, chewing a peanut butter toast. His mom, Teresa, had just come back from a night shift looking exhausted, but her eyes, as always, saw everything. She set her coffee mug down and looked at him. "Franklin, what's going on with you?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. "You haven't been yourself lately." He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Just school, Mom. Lots of homework." Teresa narrowed her eyes, sitting across from him. "Don't lie to me, son. I saw your hoodie in the trash. And that bruise didn't come from basketball." Franklin froze. He thought he'd hidden the evidence well, but his mom always knew more than he wanted. He opened his mouth to say something, but she raised a hand. "I'm not mad," she said quietly, "but I need to know what's happening. We moved here for a better life, not for you to hide things from me." He sighed, feeling the words catch in his throat. Telling her everything would make her worry, maybe even go to the school or the police. But staying silent was harder. "Just some guys at school," he started, choosing his words carefully. "There. Not exactly thrilled I'm here." Teresa's lips tightened, her eyes darkening. "What did they do?" she asked, a steely edge to her voice. Franklin told her not everything, but enough. About the park, Trevor, the fight. He skipped the worst words, but Teresa understood anyway. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, staring out the window where a neighbor was watering their lawn. "Franklin," she finally said, "I know how it feels. I heard those same words when I was your age, and I know how much you want to hit back to make them shut up, but you're stronger than that. You can be better." "I tried, Mom." His voice cracked. "I really tried, but they don't listen." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "Then make them listen," she said. "Not with fists, with words. You're smart, Franklin. You'll find a way." He nodded, but inside he wasn't so sure. Words sounded nice, but how do you make people listen when they've already made up their minds about you? That same day, Franklin went to the library, not because he loved reading, but because it was quiet. The smell of old pages and dust was calming. He sat at a corner table, opened his history textbook, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His mom was right. Fists wouldn't change anything. But what would? He didn't notice someone approach until he heard a voice. "Hey, you're that new kid who took down Trevor, right?" Franklin looked up. A lanky guy with red hair and freckles stood there, wearing a t-shirt with some rock band's logo. His name was Dan, from a parallel class. "I didn't take him down," Franklin said curtly, returning to his book. "We just had a disagreement." Dan grinned, sitting down uninvited. "Come on, everyone's talking about it. Trevor's pissed, but he's not messing with you. That's something." Franklin glanced at him. "Nothing cool about it. I don't want trouble." Dan shrugged. "Maybe not, but trouble finds you. Trevor's like that. If he senses weakness, he won't let up. But you held your ground, and that means something." Franklin didn't reply, but Dan's words stuck with him. Maybe he hadn't won, but he'd shown he wasn't scared. The question was what to do next. The following Monday, the tension at school was palpable, like the smell of rain before a storm. Franklin was heading to gym class when he saw Trevor by the gymnasium. He was with a group of seniors laughing, but when he spotted Franklin, his face changed. He said something to his friends, and they turned, sizing Franklin up. Franklin gripped his backpack strap and kept walking, heart pounding. He knew Trevor wouldn't forget. And he was right. After class, as students dispersed, Trevor cornered him near the locker room. Zach and Kyle were with him, but they hung back like they didn't want to get involved. "Well, hero," Trevor started, his voice low but cutting. "Think you're tough, 'cause you got one punch in. Think that changes anything." Franklin stopped, feeling every eye in the hallway turn to them. A few students slowed down, whispering. "I don't want to fight," Franklin said, keeping his voice steady. "Just leave me alone." Trevor laughed, but it was hollow. "Leave you alone? You don't deserve it." He stepped closer, eyes gleaming. "You're an outsider here, and everyone knows it. Why'd you even show up?" Franklin felt anger rising, but remembered his mom's words. "Make them listen." He took a deep breath. "I'm here because my family moved," he said, looking Trevor in the eye. "I'm not bothering anyone. Why's that so hard for you to accept?" Trevor faltered, not expecting that response. But instead of backing off, he got angrier. "Don't tell me what I have to accept," he snapped, shoving Franklin in the chest. "You're nobody, got it? Nobody." The shove was hard. Franklin stumbled but stayed upright. The hallway went quiet, only whispers of fights coming, breaking the silence. Franklin felt his fists clench instinctively, but he forced his hands to relax. "If I'm nobody, then why are you so scared?" he asked quietly. Those words hit like an arrow. Trevor's face flushed, his jaw clenched. He grabbed Franklin by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his fist raised. "I'll make you," he started, but didn't finish. "Trevor, enough," a voice rang out. It was Sophie, pushing through the crowd, her eyes blazing. "Are you completely stupid? Everyone's watching." Trevor glanced around, noticing phones in students' hands. Someone was already recording. He let go of Franklin, but didn't step back. "This isn't over," he hissed before walking off, shoving past Sophie. Franklin stood there, breathing heavily. His heart was racing, but he didn't feel fear, just exhaustion. The crowd started to disperse, some whispering, some laughing. Sophie approached him. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine," he muttered, adjusting his backpack. "Thanks. Again." She sighed. Trevor won't stop until he feels like he's won. But you did the right thing not hitting back. That's what gets to him most. Franklin nodded, but one thought gnawed at him. How long could he keep this up? And what would happen when his patience ran out again? That evening he went to the park, the same one where it all began. He sat on a bench, listening to the wind howl through the trees. The smell of wet leaves mixed with the faint scent of smoke. Someone was burning a fire nearby. He thought about Trevor, his words, and why they hurt so much. Then he heard footsteps. Turning, he saw Linda Evans, the older woman with the dog. She was walking along the path, her terrier pulling at the leash. "Franklin," she said, stopping. "You look like the world's weighing you down." He smiled faintly, though he didn't feel like it. "Just thinking," he replied. Linda sat on the bench beside him, her dog settling at her feet. "I heard about you and that Trevor," she said, staring into the distance. "Whole town's talking." Franklin frowned. "And what are they saying?" "All sorts." She shrugged. "Some say you're a troublemaker. Others say you're brave for standing up. But I see you just want to live in peace." He didn't answer, but her words hit home. Linda turned to him. "You know, I grew up in times when things were even worse," she said. "My brother, he was like you. Smart, but proud. Got himself into trouble because of it. But he taught me something. If you want to change people, start small. One step, one word. And suddenly, someone starts listening." Franklin looked at her. What if they don't want to listen? Linda smiled. Then speak louder. She stood, patted her dog, and walked off. Franklin stayed on the bench, watching the darkness deepen. For the first time in a week, he felt something like hope. But the next day, everything unraveled. During lunch, Franklin was in the cafeteria when Trevor and his crew stormed in. This time, they didn't hide. Trevor marched up to Franklin's table, where he sat with Dan and another guy, and knocked his tray to the floor. Food splattered, staining his shoes. "Whoops, sorry," Trevor said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That was your lunch. Maybe you'd rather eat off the floor," like he didn't finish. Franklin stood, his eyes burning. He knew he should hold back, but this time the line had been crossed. "Shut your mouth," he said, his voice low but carrying across the cafeteria. Trevor laughed, but it was nervous. Everyone was watching. The teachers hadn't noticed yet, but the tension in the air was electric. Or what? Trevor taunted, shoving Franklin in the chest. "Gonna play hero again." Franklin didn't back down, and when Trevor swung, he was ready. The cafeteria froze. The clatter of spoons and chatter died down, every eye fixed on Franklin and Trevor. The tray lay on the floor, fries and spilled cola pooling around it. Trevor stood there, his fist hovering, ready to strike. Franklin felt every muscle tense, adrenaline flooding his veins, but this time he didn't lunge into a fight. Not because he was scared. He remembered Linda's words. "Speak louder." Time seemed to slow. Franklin lowered his hands, squared his shoulders, and looked Trevor straight in the eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but piercing, like a bell ringing in an empty church. "Why are you so afraid, Trevor?" he asked. "I haven't done anything to you, so why can't you just walk away?" Trevor faltered, his fist slowly dropping. He'd expected a punch, a shout, anything to justify his aggression, but Franklin's words cut deeper than any fist. The cafeteria was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Zach and Kyle, standing behind Trevor, exchanged uneasy glances, their faces showing discomfort. "What are you blabbering about?" Trevor snapped, but his voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of someone like you." "Then why are you here?" Franklin took a step forward, holding his gaze. "You keep coming after me, calling me names, shoving me. If I don't matter to you, why can't you stop?" The crowd whispered. Some students looked away, as if ashamed of what was unfolding. Sophie, standing nearby, held her phone, but wasn't recording. She just watched, her eyes tense. Dan, at Franklin's table, stood up, ready to jump in, but Franklin stopped him with a gesture that Trevor's face flushed, his jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, without yelling, without fists. He glanced at Zach for support, but Zach looked away. Kyle muttered something under his breath and stepped back. "You think you're smart, huh?" Trevor tried to regain control, but his voice sounded weaker. "You think you can just show up here and—" "I didn't come here to prove anything," Franklin interrupted. His voice grew firmer, yet calm, like a lake at dawn. "I just want to live, go to school, hang out with my sister, help my mom. But you act like I don't have that right. And I want to know why." The silence became unbearable. Everyone waited for what would happen next. A hit, a shout, anything. But Trevor said nothing. His eyes darted, searching for an escape. Then he laughed, sharp and fake. "Whatever, man," he threw out, but his words lacked strength. He turned and walked off, shoving through the students in his way. Zach and Kyle hurried after him, not looking back. Franklin stood there, feeling his heart slowly calm. He hadn't won, not in the way people imagine victory in fights. But something had shifted. Students started to disperse, some whispering, some casting quick glances his way. Sophie approached, her face serious. "That was something," she said quietly. "I thought you'd hit him." Franklin sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So did I," he admitted. "But it wouldn't have helped." She nodded, as if she understood. "Trevor'll come back," she added. "But now he knows you're not scared." Franklin didn't reply, but her words hit home. He wasn't sure if he was fearless, but for the first time he felt he could hold his head high. That evening, he told his mom everything. Teresa sat on the couch, listening silently, her fingers gripping a mug of chamomile tea. When he finished, she looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Franklin," she said softly. "Not because you didn't hit back, because you didn't let them take your dignity." He nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. But he knew this wasn't the end. Trevor might have backed off, but his anger hadn't gone anywhere. And Franklin understood. If he wanted to change anything in Willow Grove, one moment in the cafeteria wasn't enough. The next week, the school buzzed with rumors. Some called Franklin a hero, others a show-off. But something had changed. A few students started greeting him in the hallways. Dan invited him to play basketball after school, and Sophie sat with him at lunch one day. They were small steps, but they mattered. One evening, Franklin went back to the park. The autumn leaves had nearly all fallen, branches swaying in the wind, the air smelling of damp moss and distant smoke. He sat on the same bench where he'd met Linda Evans and thought. He didn't know what would come next, whether Trevor would leave him alone or if others in town would change their attitudes. But he felt he'd taken a first step, not with fists or shouts, but with words that made people think. Then he heard a familiar sound, twigs snapping. Turning, he saw Linda with her dog. She stopped, her eyes glinting in the twilight. "Heard you put on a show at school," she said with a faint smile. Franklin shrugged. "Just said what I thought." Linda nodded, sitting beside him. "Sometimes that's all it takes," she said. "One voice that isn't afraid. And suddenly, others start listening." She paused, looking at the stars breaking through the clouds. "But don't stop, Franklin," she added. "The world doesn't change in a day, but it changes if you don't give up." He nodded, a warmth spreading in his chest. Linda stood, patted her dog, and walked off, her figure fading into the dark. Franklin stayed on the bench, listening to the wind rustle the treetops. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, new conflicts, new stares, new words. But he knew he was ready, ready to speak, ready to listen, ready to be himself. And deep inside, he felt this was only the beginning. Epilogue weeks passed. Trevor didn't bother Franklin anymore, though their eyes sometimes met in the hallways, cold but without threat. Zach and Kyle kept their distance, unsure how to act. The school slowly got used to Franklin. Some became friends, others stayed indifferent, but he no longer felt like an outsider. One day, Mr. Rogers, the history teacher, asked Franklin to stay after class. He pulled a sheet of paper from his desk, an invitation to the school debate club. "You've got a voice, Franklin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "and I think you could use it to change more than just a cafeteria." Franklin took the paper, a smile touching his lips. He wasn't sure if he'd join, but the idea that his voice could be heard filled him with hope. Home, when he told his mom, Teresa hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "I always knew you were special," she whispered. Franklin didn't reply, but his eyes shone with belief. Not that everything would be easy, but that he could try, and that was enough.